liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their futures. Soldiers, speak out.
Welcome to Veterans Hour. I'm your host, Zahid Chaudhry. With me in the studio today, we have Mary Hanson, a longtime peace activist, and I have Glen Anderson, a longtime peace activist since the 60s, got started and still hasn't stopped. So here we are today. Today's topic is the carbon footprint of United States military, or carbon footprint of the militaries of the world. How does that affect us here and now? Why, who is a substantial polluter on the planet? Who's one of the biggest fossil fuel users? Which entity is the biggest fossil fuel users on the planet? And what will happen if their emissions, if their pollution, and if their carbon footprint is not accounted for? So Mary, I will start with you. So what happens, when we talk about, those three aspects, the carbon footprint, the pollution created by it, and all those about military industrial complex. Would you share some insights on your research you have done? You have been studying this subject very keenly for such a long time.
Thank you. Well, the issue is the fact that the United States military is the largest carbon polluter institution in the entire world. And the figures are astronomical, to the place where I'm going to come to my conclusion first. If we don't eradicate militarism, and if we don't eradicate the military's share, the militaries of all countries' share of carbon pollution, we have a chance of keeping the world temperature rise to a level where we will have a civilization. So that's a heck of a claim. Yeah. The problem is that scientists who are trying to figure out how much carbon pollution has occurred, or how much the Earth can absorb, and these kinds of issues, they need baseline information. And back at the time when the Kyoto Protocol was being developed, an international protocol to deal with climate change back in 1997, it was an amazing story that I did not know. Basically, the United States insisted in the negotiations that the carbon emissions of the United States military overseas, on all overseas military bases, on all planes being used overseas, on all ships and tankers and everything, would not be reported.
Really?
Yeah, would not be reported, as though they didn't exist. Okay. But they do exist. Not only did they negotiate a rule that they would not be reported, they extended it to the militaries of all countries. So the international aviation and bunker fuels, the title of these.
The bunker fuel is a large term for all the fuels used. What is it, $17 billion? The old figures are $17 billion a year.
Yes.
And the Department of Defense says that they really, really, really need it.
Yeah, and so that amount of fuel isn't measured and isn't put in the baselines of all these scientists. And efforts to try to change that have come up short. There's been well over a decade of effort. running close to 2 decades of effort to recognize this and make the international fuel use of all militaries part of the carbon footprint of the entire Earth, but they're not at this time. Now, out of fairness, the carbon footprint within the country, in country, is measured to some extent, but there again, there's a lot of slippage in the rules. So the bottom line is that when we say, oh, we're doing well or we're not doing well as far as trying to meet our goals, we don't know what we're talking about because we haven't measured how much fossil fuel is really being used because this huge chunk of it isn't reported.
So it is just like the same analogy. A little household, which is, watering their garden, growing veggies, is penalized and told to pay higher taxes and everything else. But a huge golf course have exemption. So here we're talking about the 800-pound gorilla. And so in Kyoto Protocol, did they secure the exemption? What was the exemption they secured? And what was the confidentiality clause?
Well, the exemption was that international aviation and bunker fuels would not be counted if they were out of country. So that's basically, and once they fought hard, the United States, Stuart Eisenstadt is the name of the person who said all this to a Senate committee, so it's on the record. And it was Senator Chuck Hagel who worked then to, after getting this exemption written into the Kyoto Protocol, then convince the Senate not to pass the Kyoto Protocol. So there it is. So internationally, from that time on, no country had to report this fuel use. And like you said, the United States is $17 billion a year worth of fuel, and that's probably a conservative figure because there are other exemptions for business and corporation and we bought it from these and those, and there's a lot of ways.
Contractors and
exactly. Was it private, some private business, contractors? So even that 17 billion probably doesn't really account for the total.
Few years old.
Yeah.
So my question is, let me get this straight so I can understand it correctly. So first thing, there's an exemption clause that bunker fuel, 1,000 military bases nearly overseas. There are only 200 countries, so that puts a perspective. 5 bases on average per country, 5 cities, 5 countries. So on their sovereign territories.
Right.
But so they are exempt. But on top of that, there's for domestic, which we're supposed to report, there's a confidentiality clause.
Right.
So that is not correct. So how could we work for solutions, for correct solutions rather than false solutions? How could we, the people, really have an assessment or an idea when they have a confidentiality clause for the overseas fuel usage, and no, they have exemption, and they have for domestic fuel usage, they have exemption.
Yeah.
That is just.
It's really crazy, and I think that the only logic that I come to is that people were recognizing that climate change was probably real, but they still wanted to make as much money as they possibly could. So now we have a situation which is really crazy, where we are building up the military to fight other countries who have a stake in the total amount of fossil fuels there are, the resource. So we're spending precious fossil fuels over who owns the resource and who profits from the resource, the dwindling resource of fossil fuels, which have to stay in the ground. Now, if you look at the figures, and I'm not going to go into it too much,
just a perspective.
In a general sense, if we, by 2050, do not seriously eliminate, I don't mean cut back, I mean eliminate the fossil fuel use of the military, we're going to miss even the most conservative climate change goals.
So would it be fair to say the whole environment movement will be misled or will be led to false solutions, and their energy spent or extracted that if they do not work and include the carbon footprint, the fossil fuel usage, and the pollution, and
Yeah.
the pollution worldwide,
Yeah.
in international waters, in air, in soil, and all that,
Yeah.
if they do not include that military's pollution and fossil fuel usage, and they don't pay the carbon tax, what good is it?
Yeah, yeah. It's so big that they can't see it. It's so hidden that they can't see it. We don't see the military bases all over the world. We see our own little neighborhoods. We really don't. It's not visible to us, and that is a horrific problem, because if it's not visible to you, then it's as though it doesn't exist. So my worry is that we are overwhelmed at this time. The money that's being spent on the military is finite. And so that money should be going immediately to mitigate what we know is likely to happen as far as climate change is concerned, to get ready, to get ourselves ready, to be putting up as much as we can solar panels. The one thing that makes me hopeful in this whole thing is that the rate of solar panel installation is faster than we ever expected it to be. And that's really good. But even with a very fast solar adoption, we will not be able to keep climate change to a livable level unless we recognize that the military is not the solution to conflict in the world. The military really is the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. So you just said something about finite money for the military. For that, I will go to Glen Anderson and economic cost of the
Yes,
military.
thank you.
Glen,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well,
Do they ever have finite money? Because some people say they always get, the military always
Yeah.
get. It's the schools, it's the healthcare, it's the people
Right.
who suffer.
Right. Well, I know within Veterans for Peace, one of the main principles within Veterans for Peace organization is that they want to make people aware of the real costs of the war, of war as an institution. And Mary has lifted up something that's otherwise hidden from us, that it's embedded in the deception about what's happening to the climate, and it leads to inadequate science, and it leads to suppression of knowledge. The more direct costs that people recognize are, it's expensive. Like you say, we got to spend the money on education, health, take care of the environment, all kinds of things that people really need. When money is diverted from those things to support killing and destruction, of course, the budget trade-off is huge, and the peace movement has been addressing this for decades and decades. I've been active in the peace movement since the 60s, and that was always an issue, that money we need is going to this other stuff. And it's been such a perennial problem that many people have just stopped paying attention to it, and it's still bad. It's about half, depending on how you do the calculating, it's roughly half of the discretionary budget that Congress gets to play with. Some Social Security is paid into through a separate trust fund. Interest on the national debt, that's already required. But as far as the stuff that Congress can choose to appropriate money for this or that or whatever, this is about half. And so it skews the budget, it deprives the civilian sector, education, healthcare, natural resources, and so forth. But it also distorts the economy because it puts industrial resources and human skills that could be doing good stuff into destructive stuff. So if you're an engineer who would know how to design windmill blades, but instead you're an engineer designing jet fighter wings.
Not interested in designing, you have no option to do that. You have no option to do constructive stuff.
Right.
This is the only jobs which are out
Right.
there.
But the point is that it's the transferable skills.
Yeah.
So you get somebody who's an engineer, and they could either be designing windmill blades or wings for fighter planes. It's the same technology, and so we're starving some sectors of the economy while doing others. It used to be when Mary and I were young, growing up in this country, the United States made TV sets, we made electronics, we made all kinds of stuff there's not been a TV set made in the United States for many, many years, at least any amount of volume. And I've been researching the military abuses of the economy for a long time, since the mid-70s. And people, even back in the 60s, were starting to recognize the United States was falling behind in some of the technologies for industrial quality, whereas West Germany and South Korea and other countries were putting effort into improving their industrial capacities for modern steel making, for consumer electronics and so forth.
So that's what you
we've
mean.
lost, yeah, so we've lost these capabilities from this country. A lot of the skills no longer exist here because the giant corporations have shifted jobs overseas, but also because the military has shrunk the consumer part of our productive economy, the civilian part of the thing, and we've disinvested in efficient steel making mills and so forth. And so it skews us, it skews the economy in systemic ways, and in some other ways that go beyond the scope of this program. But the point is that there are economic costs to war as a system that go beyond that. And then we've got people who come back from war disabled, traumatized in physical and emotional and other ways, who should be at the prime of their productive capacity in their careers, and instead of being productive citizens in the economy, they end up needing health care and other things, or they end up not being able to function in the economic world. And so we're losing productivity of people who should be economically productive citizens. I mean, apart even from the human cost of what it does to people, but so the economy is suffering in many ways because war has just captured the U.S. economy.
Are there any secret costs of war?
Well, some of these costs are hidden in that they're not really looked at, but and we've become sort of accustomed to it. It's like the frog in the water model that people talk about. You know, you gradually increase the temperature and it'll cook. Yeah, and so we're so used to this, but we don't recognize what it would be like to have a real viable civilian economy with productivity. Anyway, so we have those kinds of things. There are human costs that are hidden too. We not only traumatize our own people, but when we make war in some other country, we're traumatizing people. We're giving PTSD to people in the countries where we have drone wars. We're attacking civilian populations with drones, and there are little kids and all the way up through the age range of people who have been traumatized by horrible things that come out of the sky at them. So and we don't think about that in this country because it's happening someplace else. See, these are kids in Yemen, these are kids in Somalia, these are kids in Pakistan, in all kinds of places. But they're getting PTSD because of what our military is doing, because of our war mentality. And we've got people who are still dying from landmines that had been placed in other nations over decades past. We've got people in Vietnam being born with birth defects because of Agent Orange that we had used there to defoliate forests and farmlands in the 1960s and early 70s. And
18 million gallons of
yeah,
Agent Orange?
It's amazing, yeah. And so we have poisoned other countries and deprived them of being able to grow their own agriculture. We're still causing birth defects and blowing off limbs from people. And the United States had not signed the landmine treaty. The United States refuses to take responsibility. In some ways, they'll be...
Why? Is it the American exceptionalism at play here?
Yes. This American exceptionalism is that concept that says there's something so special about this country that we really don't have to pay attention to international law, that this is like a shining beacon of liberty on a hill, and we're a beacon of liberty to the rest of the world, And so we somehow are entitled to boss everybody else around, tell them what to do, but we don't really have to obey international law ourselves. And so there are lots and lots of international laws where the United States is in violation. A number of treaties that we've never signed on to. There's a treaty, I don't remember the exact name of it, it's about the rights of the child. And there are two nations that had not signed on to it. One was, I don't remember, it was like Somalia or one, it was someplace with bad human rights. And the other was the United States. The United States did not sign on because we reserve the right to recruit people into the military before they're 18. You know, there's early
17 and join
earlier.
earlier.
And we didn't want other countries doing that. We never, you know, I mean, there's an international agreement about the rights of women that we've not signed on to. And there's lots and lots of, so that American exceptionalism, you know, there are people that really don't want to be part of the world community. And those are hidden costs of war, just like the way it skews the science and it inhibits us from solving the climate crisis that Mary's talking about. And so these are very insidious and hidden things, and they end up in a debilitating way, making us less good than the country that we ought to be. So the peace movement is not against the United States. We disagree with things that the United States government does, but we want this to be a better country, and the military is actually holding us back in many ways, in terms of economics, in terms of the science that, like Mary has said, in terms of dealing with the climate crisis, in terms of our role in the world, where the rest of the world sees the United States as basically a bully that does violence in all kinds of places. So we have reduced our own standing in the world as not something that people look up to, but something that people just fear, like a schoolyard bully. The schoolyard bully is not a popular person, not well liked. And I've been telling people for years that in the old Wild West, the most insecure guy out in the Wild West was the guy who claimed to be the fastest gun in the West, because everybody was gunning for that guy. And if you were like, if you said, I'm about the 83rd fastest gun in the West, nobody would be gunning for that guy.
I see.
But if you're bossing around the rest of the world and trying to dominate them economically, militarily, politically, in all kinds of ways, people are going to be gunning. People are going to want to fly airplanes into your skyscrapers. People are going to want to attack the Pentagon. The Pentagon itself on September 11th of 2001 was attacked. The very headquarters of the U.S. military gets attacked on that day. The nuclear weapons didn't save us. You know.
A nuclear weapon? I mean,
I
don't understand. I mean, we will detonate nuclear weapons on our own soil, let alone anywhere else. That's not a saving. That's a mutual destruction.
Right.
Suicide.
It's suicide. Yeah. But this is how it skews our thinking. The militarism of war skews our thinking in such a way that it just poisons our sense of logic, so that we have that.
So
anyway,
speaking about treaties and our standing, treaties, COP20, COP21, Peru. What is your understanding of that?
Well, unfortunately, my understanding of it is that it's a bit of a show, because the United States participates, and I think many of the participants are very sincere and talented, and are really trying to do their best. But at the end of the day, if the Senate doesn't pass a treaty, then it doesn't go into force. So what in the next meeting on global warming in Paris, called COP21, it will be in December, President Obama has already said that this will be voluntary. So
what kind of show it is? Let's put it. Let's not sugarcoat it. What do you think? What kind of show it is?
I feel that what's been happening is that they've taken advantage of the ignorance of the American people. That the American people are a bit asleep at the switch, to be honest with you. That it's on purpose to protect the interests of the oil companies and protect the interests of the military contractors. The military contractors make out both ways. For example, foreign aid is a good example of this. Now, if the United States sells a country gives, quote unquote, say $3 billion to country X. And the deal is that country X has to buy planes, F-35s, for example, from a corporation in this country. Then what they're doing is increasing militarism. So that country is increasing its fossil fuel footprint, its militarism.
Its pollution, its
yeah,
everything.
and the United States corporation is the military-industrial complex is making money off of it. We have many cases where the United States military of today is fighting wars and the opponent is using weapons that were originally given to someone or other on that side by the United States or bought from the United States. So we're fighting our own weapons. But when we fight our own weapons, there is a winner, and that winner is the defense contractor. So between the oil and defense contractor sectors, they carry a big stick. They have over 1,000 lobbyists in Washington. So that's where the political system comes down, that with 1,000 lobbyists running around screaming, we've got to build up the military, we've got to build up the military,
we
we've got to build up the
haven't
military.
built up military? Because my question to you is, since 1776, 239 years, we've been at war. Out of the last 239 years, we have been at war for 220 years, 222 years. So, I mean, we are the most dominant military power on the face of the planet, and we still have to do that?
Yeah, it's exploiting, the way I understand the psychology of it, which I think is really important, is that we have valid fears, and we have valid things that we need to defend. I don't even question that. Some of my family's favorite friends back in the day were military people. I mean, and they were involved in World War II, and you know, they would say, they were just good folks. So it's not that people are bad, it's the institutions that are the problem. And so as an institution, the way that the military functions is that people fill insecure for real reasons. I don't know how I'm going to put my kid through college. I don't know how our state is going to pay for fighting the wildfires in the eastern part of the state. Those are real fears. But then they take that real fear and they wrap it up into, well, we need a military solution to this problem. If we spend more money on the military, you will feel less frightened. And people buy that, but they don't even know they've bought in.
So what you just said, if I can correctly understand, correct me if I'm wrong. So whatever the problem, the solution is militarism.
That's right.
More money to the
Yes.
defense contractors, and most of that money, even when we give aid to other people, it stays in the Washington, D.C. Beltway.
It stays within the military-industrial complex, yeah, and it keeps bleeding. One example that I like to use from the movie Sense and Sensibility, and yes, I am a boomer and proud of it. They show this woman, this lovely woman, who has a horrible fever, and she's lying there, and they don't know if she's going to live or die. And there's this wonderful doctor who really cares, and he has a basin, and he puts it under her arm, and he carefully cuts into her vein and bleeds. They believed that bleeding people would make them better, and they were good people. And that's how I see the military, that people in this country feel on a gut level that if they give more money to the military, somehow it will make them feel less insecure. And so that's how the militarism goes unchecked. And then if you do start to question it, then, oh, you know, you're a traitor or you're un-American or whatever. So they equate being in support of everything the military does with being a patriot. And I feel like Glen and I are patriots. We care about the people of this country and the people all over the world and our true needs, our true securities, our true needs to defend a way of life that is healthy.
Some of that, the fear that you're talking about is kind of, there are real things to be afraid of. Like you said, you know, am I going to be able to put my kid through school? How are we going to put out the wildfires, blah, 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 blah. But what the system, at the very large level, the system does is take the real fears that people have and then misplace the source of it. So it's like, oh, those Mexicans are taking all our jobs. No, big corporations move the jobs overseas. It's not Mexicans taking away your jobs.
But dividing and conquering between the people
right.
is...
It's a deception. So it's like a magician, you know. They get you up here on the stage, and I'm the magician, and I'm up here, I'm distracting you on your shoulder. Meanwhile, I've taken your wristwatch, you know, because you've looked up here, and the viewing audience has looked up here, and all of a sudden, I got your wristwatch, you know. And that's what they're doing with fear. So the fears are very well cultivated. And you look at the politicians. You got to be afraid of gay people, you know, and I mean that's put out there. You know, you got to be afraid of this or that or whatever. And meanwhile, they're, you know, the system, the economic system, and the political, the military, and whatever is doing horrible things, but they're not paying attention to that. It's all about, oh, those gay people, oh, those Mexicans. Oh, you know, it's always a fear thing, and the military reliance is like this saying people have where if the only tool you have is a hammer, you're going to treat every problem as if it were a nail. And so instead of actually trying to solve a problem in another country so that the problem goes away and we've met the need, it's like we should bomb these guys or we should arm these guys to fight those guys.
And political problems can never be solved with military
it doesn't
solutions.
Yeah, I mean, if there's some family that doesn't get along here in Olympia, it would not solve that family's problem if I went over there and started shooting up their family members, or you know,
good point, well made.
You know,
point well made.
You know, I mean that's just going to mess things up further.
It's good to
let's
put in a
solve,
context.
get clear about what the problems are, and let's solve the problems. But these are social problems. They're political. They're economic. And somebody to come in from the outside, from the other side of the world, and go over there and start using violence on them, all that does is make it worse. And the United States has cultivated more terrorists than Osama bin Laden ever could have imagined because of what we've done in the last 14 years. So, in fact, on September 11 of 2001, a friend of mine who has traveled extensively, he spent time in Norway, he spent time in New Zealand and stuff. He called me up and needed to talk about what was just happening in New York City and at the Pentagon on September 11th. And he said, you know, those guys did not attack Norway or New Zealand. You know, it was the World Trade Center. The name is the very center of global capitalism, and the Pentagon is the very headquarters of U.S. militarism. That's what got attacked. They didn't attack. They weren't after us for our freedom. They didn't attack a library. You know,
because to me, I have a greater respect for libraries. So,
yeah, they didn't attack a library, and they didn't attack a college.
Yeah,
they attacked the headquarters of global capitalism and the headquarters of U.S. militarism.
There's an old saying.
And then we've cultivated more enemies ever since then.
We've responded entirely with fear and militarism.
Yeah,
and anybody who questions, is that the way to solve it, is accused of being unpatriotic. But so you get into this cycle, you get into these spirals, and it picks up, it is a bit like a snowball rolling downhill. It picks up more and more of the resources and energy of the country, and it becomes more fearful.
And it's inherently unwinnable.
Yeah.
That's never going to work. And the more we put resources into it, so the Veterans for Peace concern at the national level is, among other things, the cost of war. One of the costs of war is it screws up our thinking. It makes us stupid. It prevents us, it distracts us from really solving problems because it says, you know, you just need more guns. You know,
every solution is more guns.
I worked for the state for a couple decades, and in the job that I had, professional job, we would sometimes have a disagreement with some other state agency, right? And this happened often. Nobody in staff meetings in the decades I worked for the state ever said, let's get a bunch of guns and go over to the headquarters of that agency, start shooting people until they do things our way. Nobody said that. But at the federal level, that's the default.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
So, as you said, there's economic costs of war, which you have made case. There's environmental cost of war. There's a climate cost of war. There is human costs.
Yeah.
People in other countries, there's human cost here at home. There's hidden cost to our society.
Yeah.
There war cost to our societies in more profound spiritual ways.
Yeah.
It is just
It's the militarism, this addiction to war, and it really is an addiction, is actually hurting our nation's soul. See, the Americans are proud about what we stand for, as a nation. We have these great values, but these values are being undermined by war as an institution. It's not a criticism of the individuals in the military, but it's the system, it's the policies, it's the decisions that get made at the federal level that is really undermining our best values.
one simple question: is war really necessary?
Well, we had a sign at our peace vigil that says, "Is war really necessary?" And I was holding that sign. This was 20 years ago, holding the sign.
You've been doing
and
that
a
for
guy,
25 plus
yeah,
years.
Yeah, and a guy walked by at a pretty brisk pace, didn't stop to chat. He just, as he walked by, he saw the sign I was holding that says, "Is war really necessary?" He says, "Yeah, sometimes you got to beat them up." Now, that was his response, and he walked on by. His assumption as an American was he would be the beater, he would not be the beatee. As an American,
Oh.
it was just the unspoken assumption that he and other Americans have a right to beat up other people. It's implicit in being an American. He would never say, "Yeah, sometimes I need to get beaten up." No, he was, as an American, he was the beater,
I thought
never
it was,
not the
it was
beatee.
our values. treat others as we would like to be treated.
But that would be good. Let's practice that as a nation. But we don't do that because we got enough guns, enough weapons, and enough nuclear weapons that we can do this. So this guy could unwittingly say something that I've been telling that story now for a couple of decades. But this is part of the American exceptionalism, and it's part of how the pervasive and persistent militarism in this country makes us think sloppily. It makes us stupid. And so this guy did not have a clear understanding of his role in the world. His role in the world, as he saw it, was he has a right to beat up anybody he wants.
I guess it's a top-down approach. We all learn it, what we are taught, our programming and all that. I guess it plays into it.
And a sustainable solution to any of the world's problems, whether it's climate or how to feed all these billions of people, whatever, the real solutions are bottom up. It's grassroots folks who generally have a better sense of what they need than somebody way above who's going to turn a profit off of their
It's very important
misery.
that you mentioned that all the problems. I heard that again and again, and it's been an underlying, unspoken, in between the lines, that doesn't matter what the issues of the problems are, bigger problems on the planet, country, or the global. If you look at it, the militarism is part of the problem, is the problem.
Right.
It's not the part of the solution.
Right.
So,
But there is interesting stuff that's happening. For example, on a local level, many schools are teaching the kids to work out their issues with each other nonviolently. And they're having real success.
Yeah.
So that the grades in some of these schools where they've really institutionalized nonviolent problem solving, the grades in these schools are really up. And the children love the experience of being at school, whether they're poor, middle class, or wealthy. The kids like being at school. They like how they're being treated because of what you just said. The school is being run on the value, treat others as you wish to be treated. And they mean it, and then they work that. So there's a contradiction in the country right now that many of us who believe in peace really are actually happy to see developments like that, happy to see all the solar panels going up. So there is a counter to this, but the problem is, from my perspective at least, seeing quickly enough that we need to ramp it up, and that the amount of time we have, when we look at how much fossil fuel we can expend by 2050 and then by 2100, that we need to ramp it up, and we need to look at some of these things that are really, frankly, ugly, like militarism, and we need to demand more of not only our representatives, but also our institutions. If we can say to kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, you know, a lot of them just are frightened of the issue. They just don't even want to deal with it. And then they freak out when they're 15, 16 and say, well, I guess I better go in the military. Whereas if we can start earlier with them and develop their skills and their true interests and develop their nonviolent problem-solving skills, there's a whole universe of things that they can do that's valuable in the world. And that we can turn this culture around. I really believe it, and I believe it's happening already. I feel that there are pockets and places where we can do it. But when we have the military budget that we have right now, and you take a hard look at the schools.
Do we actually really have a hard fixed budget? I
Yeah.
thought it was very flexible.
There's a lot-
It's
there's a lot
about
of-
$670 billion a year.
But there's a lot that they don't count. There are
Right.
some slush
Oh,
funds.
yeah, yeah.
It's hidden.
They've created some slush funds for many
Yeah.
years after Bush started his war in Afghanistan and his war in Iraq. Those were ongoing wars, but they were treated as
Yeah.
as emergency funding, not really in the budget, and as you know, and so it was fictitiously exempted from the budget, and they're trying to get Obama and a number of people in Congress are trying to have a huge slush fund that would be apart from the budget, so they won't have to count it against the sequestration where they have to do a proportional
So in our-
cutback. So they're trying to find ways to just like with the climate thing, get around the rules to let the military be exempt from rational thinking. And the Department of Defense has never passed an audit. Federal law requires every federal agency to get audited. The biggest agency has never passed an audit and continues to refuse to be audited.
Yeah,
And they get away with it.
They hide behind.
Impunity.
They hide behind doing with
they-
immunity,
they
and
get
they
away with
hide
it.
behind national safety,
Exactly.
Yeah.
national
Yeah.
security, and
Yeah.
all sorts of
Yeah.
other smoke and mirrors.
And
Yeah.
so that what that does is it defies the best values of because we believe as a society that we believe in democracy. We want a government that's accountable to we the people. We want to have transparency, and these are all values. But the militarism, the
Ism.
system as an ism, as an ideology, declares itself exempt from that, and Congress goes along with that, and presidents go along with that, and so it's
So
become
how is-
removed, and it's in defiance of democracy. Whereas these kids that Mary talked about in school that are learning how to resolve conflicts through peer mediation, those kids are learning how to practice a democracy. They will grow up and vote. They will grow up and say we can solve problems by talking them through. Now, if they do that, then we have more democracy, and if we do that at the global level, then we have less need to go fighting wars.
So that was a good point. If the kids can start to work it out and learn that, whether that be on a micro level, children's in school, individual level,
Yeah.
or a macro level,
Right.
global worldwide
yeah,
level.
yeah. So if we don't get along with some other country, well, gee, let's try mediation.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you can see it, you know, with the issue of oil, you know, it's so clear. We got to leave most of it in the ground. Roughly speaking, 2/3 of the
Yeah.
known fossil fuel supplies should be left in the ground. And so if we were fighting hard to do what? To help the Ukrainians and the Russians get as many solar panels up as they possibly can, the Chinese are moving pretty far,
Yeah.
pretty fast and far
Yeah.
on this, so that we wouldn't be fighting over the fossil fuels, but instead we would be fighting to get solar energy, which is inherently more democratic and decentralized, into poor countries and into our opponents' hands to decrease the reasons why we are in conflict with them. That would make a lot of sense.
Perhaps that will take a much more greater and nobler thinking. I mean, here the great folks here are led by are misled, as you said,
Yeah.
by institutions.
Yeah.
Great, amazing, wonderful
Yeah.
folks are misled by
Yeah.
great, humongous institutions.
Yeah.
So,
And
in our
it's very sad.
parting wrap up thoughts, my question is to Glenn: what can people do? Can they change anything?
Well, listen to Mary and take her advice.
Okay.
I've been doing that for decades. She's great,
Thank
and
you.
not just Mary, but there's lots of
Yes,
other
yes, yes, people.
very savvy,
Or-
knowledgeable
or
people in
perhaps
the
their
peace
own
movement.
inner voice.
Listen to your own, but the information is out there, and the biggest gap, I think, is not just the information. You got to have a couple things. You got to have some good information to challenge the BS that comes out of the vested interest, the military-industrial complex, the mass media, and so forth. Part of it is you need the information, but part of it is people have become powerless, not because they want to be powerless, but because the normal avenues for working on things don't work.
But Alice
We
Walker
have-
said
The,
most people give up power because they don't think they don't have any.
right, and so the United States really has about the lowest voter
Oh,
turnout rate of any democracy on the world. Other democracies have huge voter turnouts. They have lots of political parties.
20,
And-
30,
and
40 parties.
We have two parties that have rigged the system in such a way that they can elbow everybody else out of the way. And then the big money interests have rigged the system so that the big money interests get to control stuff. And so we've allowed ourselves to become disempowered. So in some ways we are disempowered, but there are other ways around that. But organizing at the grassroots and recognizing that all the good things that have happened in this country have happened because ordinary people at the grassroots organized for it. The women's right to vote, they were organizing for 70 years before they made that happen. Labor movement, the environmental movement, all these things came from the bottom up. Nothing was a gift from a giant corporation that says, "Oh, we're going to do a favor for you folks and
no
and do
generosity
this."
from them?
And nothing was a gift from the federal government.
Top down.
Yeah, I mean, Congress didn't say, "Hey, we're going to give you gals a break. How about if you want to vote? Is that okay with you?" I mean, Congress didn't do it. That's not how it happened.
Thank
It
you.
was
Thank you.
all of this was bottom up. Labor unions, all
thank
this stuff, everything comes from the bottom up. And we can still do that, but we got to be very savvy about how social change movements work, and we've got to find strategies that bring in people, and so that people can understand that the real solutions are actually in their own interest, and then show them how to work to organize the grassroots to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you,
But
Glenn.
don't trust a politician to give it to you. We've got to do it. We got to do it ourselves.
Exactly. Wonderful. Very good point. So, Mary Hanson, just one last thing when we're wrapping this up. So, would it be fair to ask an average person who has an average small footprint, carbon footprint, pollution footprint, uses an average amount of gasoline, to take the burden of war taxes? I will call it essentially it is the taxes. Could it be looked at in a different perspective? That we have to pay, we the people, we the real people on the planet, in this country, have to pay the pollution the military-industrial complex has created all over the planet. Could it be fair that we shoulder the burden of what the war profiteers have profited from? Could it be fair to say that this pollution and this paradigm of death and destruction, which causes pollution, which uses so much fossil fuel and energy away from productive uses, away from traveling to learn, away from traveling to seek medical attention, get care? I mean, could it be fair to say, really? I mean, we understand, our audience understand that militarism, a paradigm of death and destruction, is not the answer. The answer is a paradigm of love, understanding, and working together collaboratively. So, would it be fair to say that, not being hard on the poor military-industrial complex or the war profiteers or the oil companies or their holy matrimony in between, against we the people, that why the false solutions are presented to us? If we start paying our carbon footprint, but we have exemption for the biggest user, biggest fossil fuel, biggest entity on the planet, which uses the more fossil fuel than anybody else, which uses that same entity, which produces more pollution, which has the biggest carbon footprint, and they have exemptions, they have not only exemptions, they have also national security flags. I mean, they don't have to mention. So all those, I mean, how could we ever find a solution or go from a point A to B if we have exemption for the biggest polluters, biggest criminals, biggest, polluters?
Well, I think that recognizing that it exists and feeling it a bit is really important. Feeling when you pay your taxes every year, if you do, looking at it and going, okay, I'm paying half of this to create a problem that's going to put a big stress on the little kids riding their bikes around in my neighborhood, or the little kids putting their books back at the library. It's their future that half of my taxes is hurting. And so let it hurt a bit. I think we have to feel it. I think we have to feel by looking at real people. These are the people who we're dumping this problem on. And that makes it a little easier, I think, to change what we can change in our own lives, not blaming ourselves horrifically, but I mean, yeah, having the smallest carbon footprint we can have, but recognizing our duty as a citizen to point out the big elephant in the room. And that was what, at one of these climate conferences, people made a big elephant and put out a leaflet saying, there's an elephant in the room. And,
nobody's talking about the big elephant
exactly.
in the room.
And so the simple thing that you can do would be to write to your senators, write to your members of Congress, and just say in a real simple way, why are we spending so much on the military and exempting them from fossil fuel requirements? I really want my kids to have a good future, and I can't see how we get there this way. And just simple, heartfelt, and then you go to organizations. There's one called the United for Peace and Justice. Now they are on this, and the organization that you're with, Veterans for Peace, is onto this. There are other groups. I'm with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. I also work with the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. So I think that talking to environmental and peace action and peace organizations that we belong to and raising this issue and not beating people up and saying we got to take this whole new thing on, but actually saying we do have to take this on somehow, working with other groups, somehow forming a coalition, but we got to bring this issue up. It's been buried and it's got to be visible first. And then there's been work done for years on doing conversion, converting military to peaceful purposes. I mean, the stuff's on the shelf. Right. Nonviolence, there's stuff on the shelf. Right. So just picking that stuff off the shelf, making it, making yourself an activist. Right. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to tell everybody what to do, but do what you can in your individual, neighborhood, local level, and then put one eye on the big picture and let people know that you care about it.
Well, and I think kids are part of the solution too, because we've been talking as folks with lots of years behind us, but little kids have a basic sense of what's fair and what's not fair. You can do something really unjust, and a 4-year-old kid will say, "That's not fair."
Well,
they know.
You,
you make a mess. Little kids know you can't make a mess and leave it for somebody else to clean up. That's not fair. You got to clean up your mess.
Oh, you mean the military industrial complex have to clean
their
mess?
You
mean we don't have to pay any more war taxes? We'll get a peace dividend?
Kids have a sense of this, and kids know that they're going to be living on this planet longer than old geezers like us.
Yeah.
And the kids are among the folks who feel disempowered because they know that it has been screwed up for them, and a lot of kids don't have much hope. So they need to take ownership of the problem because our generation has screwed things up, and they need to get ways to develop hope and organizing skills so they can organize the grassroots, because even little kids have a sense of fairness, and all the way up through various ages of youth ought to be at the forefront of these things.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Mary. I mean, I have 4 grandkids.
Oh, my.
Caleb, Ava, Emma, and little beautiful child. It's from 6-year-old to 11-year-old, and it's just, sometimes you look into eyes and you wonder, what is the future we're holding for them. Thank you very much. And as our beloved audience understands, the solution is we. Solution is between us. The answers are here. But the biggest polluter must clean up. The biggest fossil fuel user must need to tighten the belt. And the biggest carbon footprint holder must need to add up. Otherwise, we will be going down the false solutions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary Hanson. Thank you, Glen Anderson. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Soldiers, speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their futures.